In this segment, we'll finish our examination of the Spanish conquest of the Americas. Let's begin by noting that the success of the Spanish colonization was the result of four main elements: advanced military technology, divisions among indigenous tribes, the spread of epidemic disease, and some very notable cultural differences. Spanish military technology offered some major advantages over the indigenous forces. The Spanish wore steel armor and fought with steel swords. Muskets and cannons provided superior protection and killing power over the Incas and Aztecs, who were clad in leather and cotton armor and fought with wooden lances, bronze clubs, and stone maces. The Spanish also brought horses and dogs. Natives had never encountered a horse and were astounded when they saw men dismounting from them, for they seemed to be watching a single beast dividing in two. These sharp technological disparities were reflective of broader cultural differences between Spanish and Native Americans. As we'll see, the Spanish exploited the religious awe that the Aztec and Inca held for their rulers by humiliating and then ruthlessly murdering their emperors. The Spanish also made up for their smaller numbers by forging alliances with peoples who resented the domination of the Aztecs and Incas. These disgruntled natives reinforced the Spanish army with thousands of veteran warriors and also offered logistical support and secure bases. Perhaps the most effective weapon used by the Spanish was one they didn't realize they carried: epidemic disease. When the Spanish arrived in the Americas, they unknowingly brought with them smallpox, to which the Native Americans had never been exposed, making them highly susceptible to the deadly contagion. The Spanish movements into Central and South America were often preceded by the spread of smallpox outbreaks that decimated the local populations. Historians calculate that as many as 20 million Native Americans died of the disease in the early 1500s. For example, when the Spanish forces commanded by Hernán Cortés set siege to the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan in 1521, smallpox raged through the city, killing inhabitants by tens of thousands and fatally sapping the strength of defensive forces. Smallpox soon spread to other parts of Mexico and carried off so many people that Aztec society effectively ceased to function. Cortés had arrived in Mexico just 3 years before with 450 soldiers and 16 horses. He burned his ships upon landing to ensure his men's fealty. When he arrived in Tenochtitlan in 1519, he and his men started as guests of the emperor Moctezuma and then took him hostage and demanded the surrender of the Aztecs. Moctezuma would die during a skirmish between his military subjects and Spanish forces, who were driven out of the capital, but then returned with allied tribes who had been subjugated by the Aztecs and placed Tenochtitlan under siege. By 1521, he had starved the city into surrender, putting an end to the Aztec Empire. Further south, the Spanish conquistador Francisco Pizarro used similar tactics to defeat the Incan Empire. A ruthless adventurer, Pizarro set out for Peru in the year 1530 with but 180 men. They marched through the Andes toward the Inca capital of Cuzco. In 1532, they confronted a large Incan army at the Battle of Cajamarca. Even though outnumbered 45-1, Pizarro and his men, following Cortés's Aztec example, took as their prisoner the Incan emperor Atahualpa. Leaderless, Incan ruling elites were called to conference to end the battle. The Spanish again seized the Incas and killed most of them. Atahualpa was spared until his subjects delivered a large bounty of gold to the Spanish. He was then strangled by Pizarro's men. By 1540, the rest of the Incan Empire had fallen to the Spanish. The extraordinary brutality displayed by the conquistadores in their treatment of Native Americans didn't end with the latter's defeat. As Spain shifted to occupying and administering its growing colonial empire, the native subjects were forcibly put to work providing for their new masters. However, this introduced a challenging legal conundrum for the Spanish crown. The freshly conquered lands of New Spain were officially property of Spain, and as such, its natives were subjects of the Spanish crown, with all the rights pertaining thereto, a point made by the laws of Burgos, passed into law by the Spanish crown in 1512. These laws established an administrative system in the Americas named the encomienda, according to which the Spanish could require Indians to work on the land or in the mines. In exchange, the encomenderos assumed the responsibility for the indigenous workers' health and welfare and their conversion to Christianity. Once converted, the Indians were supposed to regain their freedom without the need for an encomendero. In practice, the occupying Spanish abused the system to their benefit and, of course, did not return the land to Indians after their conversion, preferring to administer it for them until they became civilized, something that ensured continued Spanish control over 80% of the colonial lands for the following 3 centuries. Let's wrap up this week's lecture with the Columbian Exchange. The Columbian Exchange refers to the widespread transfer of food, animals, resources, people, culture, and technology between the Americas and Spain, and by extension Europe, in the 15th and 16th centuries. As Spain was the occupying colonial power, the exchange benefited Europeans considerably more than the Native Americans. For the natives, the arrival of the Spanish and then later the Portuguese, the English, and the French brought mostly subjugation and, sadly, death. By contrast, the Europeans benefited greatly from the Columbian Exchange. The Americas provided a new source of food. The discovery of the potato allowed growing more food on smaller plots of land, which in turn resulted in a population explosion starting in the early and mid-16th century. Population growth supplied European countries with more workers and more soldiers to further expand their dominance. The new lands also provided Europeans with large empires that they could not have conceived prior to 1492. Last, the geographic scope and productive potential of these new colonies led Europeans to seek new laborers, eventually taking them to Africa, where humans could be captured and enslaved. We'll return to this dark chapter of modern history in a few weeks. In the interim, we'll be looking at several remarkable civilizations that deserve our scrutiny: the Chinese and Islamic empires of the 16th to the 18th centuries. Until our next meeting, best wishes.